Welcome to Rich Dad's Stockcast with Andy Tanner. This episode, we're going to do it a little different. We're going to tell you a story about a fairly successful man who just has basically not run into trouble, but he needs some guidance. And so, who better to guide than Andy Tanner? Before we get into the story and hopefully a solution, in all honesty, this guy came to me just last night. So I'm throwing this to Andy without any prep time. So I'm excited to hear what Andy says, and I'm sure this gentleman is even more excited. But before we do that, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit the little silly bell next to the subscribe button so you actually get notifications. Please throw us something in the comment, especially about this one. Personally, the more you can put in the comments, the more engagement you have. This will actually literally help somebody that I know. So I think that's pretty cool. And as always, right before we bring Andy in, Andy is quite possibly the most generous person I've ever met. He helps me with family problems. He helps me with stock investing. He helps me with business questions. And the reason I'm saying that is he's given you a gift, and we talk about this on a lot of podcasts, but he's given you this gift that could literally change your life if you just take the hour, this free gift, I should say, take the hour and just listen to what Andy can teach you and how it can change your life. And Andy, with that, if you anything you want to say about this gift.
Well, first of all, I don't know that I'm the most generous person. I think you and
Pretty
I,
close.
Greg, just every once in a while, I lay on Greg's couch and just tell him all my problems and vice versa.
I
No,
pretty
we
much am
we
the one talking. He's the one that listens and
psychoanalyze
then helps.
psychoanalyze each other. No. So let me tell you about zero to cash flow and the reason I think this is if people want it. I don't really try to convince anyone to, get wealthy if they don't have that. Greg, I've never met anyone that got out of the rat race that had a poor spirit bump on a log. Like, if it's easy to get out, then I guess I would get out. But if it's hard to get out, then I guess I'll stay in. A
Right.
person has to hate the rat race, and they have to really understand the life that they could have if they took a different path and really pursued it, instead of just kind of dipping their toe, or maybe you listen to a podcast once in a while, to just say, hey, I'm committed, I'm getting out. Well, when a person reads the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, if their experience was anything like mine, I read it and it was very clear. Work for money, have money work for you. Buy assets or buy liabilities. It was a very clear choice. And I was like, I'm not going to spend another day pursuing this other one. I'm going to spend every day going deeper and deeper into what we call it, a cash flow quadrant of BI side. I'm just going to pursue that as much as I can. Well, one of the challenges I had when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad back in the 90s, so this is 30 years ago, is I thought, okay, I want to buy assets, and people struggle to get started. And I will just say that zero to cash flow is a very important title, because if a person doesn't have income coming in monthly that they are not doing physical work for, right? Where they don't, not from a job is what I'm talking about. How do you go from having none of that to at least having some of that and start building? And I will tell you right now, I love all the asset classes. But I'll tell you what, if you give me two people and say, how fast could I get a cash flow? And I'll challenge any asset class for this, any asset class. I can take someone from zero cash flow in 10 minutes, like in 10 minutes. Now, that's if I'm guiding them. I can explain how it can work for someone, in 90 minutes. And so, I think the reason this is an important thing is so people can see that click and get paid, that there's a literalness that I can take this little mouse right here. I can click it and money is deposited in my account through a fiber optic network at the speed of light. Like, that is as fast as you get it. Click and the money's there before I lift my finger back off the button. Money is in my account. And I've taught my sons how to do this as teenagers. They do it on a monthly basis. And just think about that advantage. If my two teenage kids can have a habit and have a life where that's normal, to have income coming in other than a job, that's huge. So if someone's read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad and they've said, I would like to start having cash flow come to my life, it's not zillions of dollars like your first day. That's lazy. That's stupid. It takes a while to build it up. But I can have cash that a person didn't have before that they have now. Click, and it's just we can manage risks. We can do it with very low risk. My most of the cash flow strategies I have are not 50-50 win or lose. They're high probability trades. I'm talking approaching 90% success rate. I mean, think about what I'm saying right here. So if a person's a bump on a log, I won't try to convince them, but that's a fun webinar that I provide for people. And it's also a great advertisement for the Cashflow Academy for people who want to go even further. So it has those benefits too, as people start to see, okay, what does financial education and paper assets look like? And what would happen if I committed to that? What might my life be like? So that's kind of a longer maybe blurb, but if a person's a bump on a log, nothing I can do about it. But if they're watching and they say, I'm not just watching for entertainment, I'm committed to leading the rat race. I want cash flow. I want to go from zero to cash flow. That's exactly what this shows people how to do.
So you're like the stock market Santa Claus. For this free gift and 90 minutes of your time, you can change somebody's life. So don't tell me you're not generous. Won't have it.
The closest I am to Santa Claus is I have my belly laughs like a bowl full of jelly. That's true. That's true. All right. So
Okay.
So I'm curious. You have not prepped me.
Yeah.
We didn't have an email or anything that said, Andy. You said, Andy, we're just going to have you address your opinion on some problem that your friends has. So this is going to be interesting to put me in the hot seat here.
So my friend comes to me last night, and he knows I work at Rich Dad Poor Dad, and he knows that we educate in a different way and have maybe tips, tricks. That's not really the word I'm looking for, but education beyond just what the average person teaches. So he comes to me and he says, "This is, by the way, the world's greatest problem." He comes to me and he says, "Hey, I have roughly $3-4 billion worth of stocks, and I want to pull them out. I want to start considering retiring. I want to do the safe thing." And let me just say this: it was 2 months ago. His stocks took a dip, like huge dip, and he's like, in like one day, I lost 1.5 million, and then it went back up. But so he's scared to keep it where he is. He's looking for something really safe and secure. And what he wanted to know is, when he pulls the stock out, where should he put it? That's the safest place that helps him the most with taxes. And I got so stuck on when you pull it out, first the hit you take on taxes. So he probably should have done something before he put it in. I don't know that, but then where do you put it, especially with the economy the way it is, the uncertainty? And I should mention, he doesn't have financial education. He's been an employee his whole life.
Yeah.
He's just now at age almost 60 learning that, oh man, there's such things as taxes and how to use debt, and so he's just now opening his eyes to this world. And he's lost. And so I said I'd talk to you, and so I'm talking to you. Where do we guide him? Where's the best place? Somebody with all that.
It's probably an advantage that I get to speak without knowing your friend, because if I knew him, I would probably be really soft and, oh, it's so nice to meet you, and very empathetic. But since I don't know him, maybe I can be bold. If he's in between the 3 or 4 million mark in his retirement, having company stock, that means he's probably mid to upper management, and he probably has some skills as an employee that have been valuable, where they've given him this money. $3 to $4 million is not a lot of money to retire on. It's just not. Being a millionaire used to be a big deal, and that just means you live in California somewhere and have a house large enough that has a garage or something. I mean, it's just not a lot of money.
Right.
And the thing I would tell your friend is, if I were to approach him, I would start with what he does for a living, and I'd ask him how quickly or how much time it would take for me to take over his job if I'd never studied what he did. In other words, maybe he's in some type of business management. Maybe he's a CFO. Maybe he's a controller. I don't know what his job is. Maybe he's a human resource guy. I have no idea what he does for that company. But I will tell you this, he has skills and experience and competence in that arena. And
Yes.
one of the great mistakes I see people make is to move into a different arena called investing, just assuming that they don't respect that move education wise.
Hmm.
I had a flight I was on that I just could have pulled my hair out. I had my noise canceling Bose headphones ready. You know, I'm sitting in my first class seat. I'm going to Atlanta to give a speech, and I'm just, when they say you can put them on back now, you can do it all the time. Back then, some reason the plane didn't work if you put them on too early, I guess. And I'm right here, and the guy, starts talking. So this guy was brilliant. He was a thoracic surgeon, or excuse me, a heart surgeon rather. He was a cardiologist, and he had won all these awards. And for 4 hours, I got to learn how much he'd learned and how brilliant he was, and how people don't respect him, and all this type of stuff. And he had extra training, and he was incredible. And let me tell you, he told me all about it. And so we
Sounds like a
start.
horrible plane ride.
I'll
That
tell you.
sounds
So we
terrible.
start. We start the approach into Atlanta, and he goes, after 3.5 hours, he goes, "So what do you do?" And I said, I invest. He goes, "Stocks and stuff?" I go, "Yeah, I like stocks and stuff." And he goes, "Hey, could you give me a couple of pointers, a couple of tips?" And I wanted to say, "Well, I'll tell you what, let's trade tips. I'm thinking about replacing my bicuspid valve tonight. Got any tips?" And the disrespect for what it takes to handle money and understand it, if a person earns it, I would first tell your friend, well, I don't want to learn anything. He might say, I've done my time. I want to be done learning. Well, does that sound like wisdom? Does that sound like a smart move to say, I don't want to learn anything? Now I'm going to move from what I really knew about making money to try to preserve this. And I will just tell you, he doesn't have a lot of money. So that's the first thing I would say is, if he wants to last from 60 years old to possibly 100, which is where my generation, it keeps going further. If he thinks that money can last in 40 years, and if I would not be looking at the vicissitudes of his stock price, I'd be looking at the vicissitudes of the rate of inflation, and have him realize that, you know, $3 million 20 years from now might feel like 250,000, or maybe 300,000. Or, I mean, we have risks of inflation that are far greater than that. And if he puts that in a bond, he better be sure it really outpaces inflation by a high degree, because he has an inflation risk that is significant. So the first thing I would say is take your financial education seriously. And then the second thing, I think we ought to spend the second half of this, and he doesn't have access to Warren Buffett. And I think that would be the best person to give him counsel, because he's the best investor in the world. So I think during the second half, what I'll do is, instead of answering it from Andy's perspective, I'll take everything I've learned and read on Warren Buffett, and I'll just give him a lot of things that Warren Buffett has said. And he can say, do I want to listen to Warren Buffett? If he had a half hour to sit down with Warren Buffett and say, hey, I've got 3-4 million bucks, it's got to last me possibly 30 years. What would you do with that money? I think he would probably take Warren Buffett up on that lunch meeting, and I think he'd take him up on it. So since Buffett's not available, I'll tell you what Buffett has said to the masses, and they'll give him some food for thought. And I think he'll land in a place that actually is exciting, illuminating, and most of all, safer, more secure, and more confident.
Well, I tell you what, he'll be grateful for that. But just to summarize what we've learned so far, to pull it out and to just basically put it under your mattress and save it is the worst plan, because inflation alone will eat that away, and it
And
won't,
he's
most
probably
likely won't be enough.
He's probably looking at debt instruments, the traditional, additional financial dogma says move from equity to debt because in theory debt is safer. That's an idea that people think, but we live in a different time. Those ideas were put out pre-1971. That dogma, if you read Securities Analysis by Graham and Dodd, right? It's literally a book about that thick. It's about 3 inches high. It could stop a train if you want, that's a book on bond investing. It's a book on debt investing because when it was written early in Buffett's life, right, by Graham and Dodd, and remember Buffett's 90 something. When it was written, it was more risky to have equity than the dogma was go to debt and it's safer. And debt, there's a lot of reasons they think debt is safer. But if you look at what Warren Buffett does and where he puts his money, he puts it in equity. So when we come back, I know we got a note saying take a break, but we're talking about solving the problem that this is not just his problem. There is a problem of retirement that is twofold. Those that don't have enough to retire at all, and those that look like they might have enough, but they don't know what to. It's one of the problems with retirement and 401k and stock sharing type of programs is they're earning the money with one set of knowledge. They're trying to hang on to that money, and money is slippery. If you don't understand money, you will lose it.
All right. Well, let's hit that when we get back. Basically, what I understand is the fear of retiring is one of the top fears in America. And so if you could add a little hope to them when we get back, I'm sure
Yeah,
that would be much appreciated. So let's do that when
100%.
we get back.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back to the Rich Dad Stockcast with Andy Tanner, and we are about to hear probably what most of America wants to hear, and that is how to retire. What do I do when I want to retire? And that's crazy important, but because it's so important and it is so personal and probably applies to everybody on the show, you do need to understand that this is not financial advice. This is financial education. Andy can't pretend that he knows you and knows what's best for you. And so you have to listen to Andy as a student, but not a what's the word I'm looking for? Not a sheep that just follows the master all around. So please
Yeah.
understand that we're not giving advice. We're not telling you what stocks to buy. We're giving you concepts, strategies, pure education. So please understand that. Don't forget to go into the description and click on Andy Tanner's free course for you. We talked about that a little bit before and how it's such a good education and concept that it is life changing. So let's not forget that. And speaking of life changing, Andy, let's hear this retirement plan that really, from
Yeah.
what I heard you say, is very Warren Buffett. It's basically from his teachings.
Yeah, and boy, this is such a larger conversation than even 15 minutes or a half hour. I mean, we're talking about $3 to $4 million. We're talking about someone's retirement. How are you going to plan 40 years or 30 years, 60 to 90? Are you going to have a 15-minute conversation? I mean, this is a very important move. It's life changing. It's life altering. It's a defining moment. It's not an inconsequential decision. It has consequences and it should be given the thought and care and knowledge that it really has to have. So I'm going to start with where we left before the break is, I mean, there's what you want and what is smart in life. I want some ice cream, but if my A1C is high, it's not smart, right? So
Right,
he says,
right.
well, this is what I want. So the first thing you got to do is you say, well, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. Great, but what is smart? And what is getting what you want often has to do with being smart. And so saying, I don't want to mess with this. I just want to be done. And I wouldn't care to learn very much more about money and investing. Then does that sound like wisdom? To me, it doesn't.
Can
Let's
I dig
talk
in?
about
Can I dig
work,
in right there, just real fast?
please.
One of the things he was looking at, or is looking at very hard, really has to do with the disclaimer we just made at the beginning, and that is, ideally, he will find a financial planner who will tell him
Oh,
exactly
boy,
what to
that's
do once a quarter, and then he will execute it. So he's looking for the advice, less the education. And so
yeah.
I know
He's
that's a
gonna
bit of a trigger
yeah.
for you, but
Things like annuities, There is such a lack of knowledge about money as there's no shortage of vipers that will take a piece of your pie in the name of acting like they know what to do. It is, I would study Warren Buffett if I were him. I would start reading some of the Berkshire letters. I'm going to talk about a specific speech he gave right now. So the idea is to live without working. If you eliminate work from your life, you're cooked. If you stop producing, you are cooked. You will have an hourglass, and that money will turn into an hourglass, and it will get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it will be a race between whether he outlives that money at a certain lifestyle. The lifestyle will have to be curtailed to fit the rate of that hourglass. You're gonna have to guess about where that money's gone. It's going to be tough just to live off the interest. Let's say $3 million at 5% is $200,000 a year. That is not a lifestyle that is going to bring a lot of comfort, 15 years from now with inflation. It's just not going to be the same. All of us can tell the stories when we were kids. I remember when, we had 25-cent hamburgers, at Dee's family restaurant, right? And we can all tell those old man stories of gas at 35 cents a gallon. It's 10 times that. So, a 30-year span is a big deal. Healthcare costs are not going to get smaller. So inflation is a really big deal to figure that in. And then you take a 30% haircut by selling it, 30%, 20% capital gain, maybe 5 to 7% state. That's a
Yep.
huge haircut. So
Yep.
he's got to really think this through of if it's worth it to do that. Now, Warren Buffett gave a great speech, and he had a question about diversification, and he absolutely drew a line. When you listen to him speak, he draws a line between the uneducated and the educated. He's very cognizant about which type of audience he's listening to. If you're an uneducated investor, his greatest counsel to you would be diversify throughout the S&P, and you won't do any worse than average, and you'll save the money, and 93% of the time you'll beat the money managers on Wall Street that are trying to pick stocks, but you'll keep the fees, which are enormous. 1%, in his words, is enormous if you know anything about compounding. So you don't want to give 30% away, and you don't want to give 1% away. That's crazy. Now he draws that line. He says, now when you talk to people who are educated, never do that. Never diversify. Never. And the words he uses, madness. And what ask your friend to do is, first of all, let's look at the frying pan he wants to jump out of, because from what you told me is he is way focused on absolutely the wrong thing, which is the stock price. So the first question I'd have for him is, A, does your company pay a dividend? Number one. And number two, more importantly, is, do you think your company is going to outlive you? In other words,
So
there is, think about this for a moment. Warren Buffett calls these easy to identify wonderful businesses. That's a direct quote from Warren Buffett. There are easy to identify wonderful businesses. So let me kind of go on a little, not a rant at all. This is not an Andy rant, but it takes a minute to explain. Let's say that everyone listening sent me their financials. In other words, every single person that is listening to this right now is going to email me their financial statement. I know your income. I know your expenses. I know your assets. I know your liabilities. I know your net worth. I know your cash flow. And I have a 3-year window to see where that went up and down. Okay. I can see the direction that you've gone in the last 3 years in all these numbers, and they're in front of me. Without question, without getting my heart rate up, without even being nervous about it, it would be easy to identify, is the word I'm going to use. Easy to identify the best financial statement in that pile. I just compare one to the other. It would be easy to identify the worst. So let's say we have, 10,000 people that will watch this eventually. Okay. I can rank them in order 1 to 10,000 based on that information. Now, I don't have a guarantee that, number one, if I were a cardiologist, we did this based on BMI, A1C, blood pressure, age, whether you hit the hammer on the knee and it kicks or not, all that stuff they do. and we were going to run a marathon for 30 miles, why would I ever place a bet on the lower quartile of those people? And why would I ever place a bet on the lower half? I would only look at the top quartile on what Warren Buffett calls a list of attractiveness. So the first thing I would do is say, what is, you own a business and work is being done. If you eliminate work, you're screwed. So there's two ways to handle the work part. You either work for money or you have money do the work for you, one or the other. But if you try to just save and eliminate having money do work, the business is offering value. So he's leaving the workforce. He's no longer offering value. The business is. So he is not, he is looking at a stock price volatility, which is absolutely silly to look at the vicissitudes of a market, because that's just people's opinion on the stock price temporarily. We got to find out if this company is worth owning. If it was worth, if you had confidence to work there for 30 years, do you have the confidence to have it to work for you for 30 years? If you have the confidence to go where and put in your work to give them, won't you let them give your work? So number one, I'd say, does your company pay a dividend, and what is it? And then number two is the company optionable, and do you know how to use the options market to generate cash flow out of it? Because if you can create, and you'll have, it would not be difficult, in my opinion, with very conservative IRA type strategies to create a cash flow pattern with the stock that he has, and you don't take that 30% haircut. And here's the thing, if you have inflation, that means your dollar gets less, buys less, or your inflation means it takes more dollars to buy stuff, right? More dollars to buy stuff. That stock price will increase with inflation because it takes more dollars to buy one. But if you pull that out and you put it in a bond that is set and it's fixed rate, a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year bond, it's a fixed rate. Well, maybe you feel good about that being fixed. Oh, it's not going to change. I'm not going to have these up and downs. But if you have, we had 9% inflation 2 years ago and 3% last year. That's 12% inflation in 2 years. And it's not going backwards. It's just slowing the rate of inflation. We're printing money. I would be mortified of inflation by tying myself to a set rate where I'm just going to, it'd be like saying I can only bring in so much. I'm putting a cap on what I could earn. I'm putting a ceiling on it, and I'm not putting a ceiling on the. If you could freeze your expenses for the next 30 years, if you could freeze your expenses for the next 30 years, well, maybe you could freeze your income. So the first thing we've got to see is if it's an easy to identify wonderful business. This is what Warren Buffett said. He said to take money and diversify it or move it out of a business strikes him as madness, because he said, he says diversification is an answer to ignorance, and I believe going from equity to debt can also be an answer to ignorance if I don't know how to identify a business. So he needs to stop looking at this stock as a piece of paper and start looking as ownership in the company that he worked so hard to build. He's a company owner now. So the question I have is this company worth owning? Now, Warren Buffett said that the risk is actually lower by owning two or three. He said he would be absolutely happy. He says, at the end of the day, I own one business, Berkshire. He owns one stock. He says this. He goes, but it's a stock I understand and it leaves me very comfortable. Coca-Cola is a business that has survived world wars, Vietnam wars, 9/11 attacks, subprime meltdowns, internet bubble bursts, and recently a pandemic, and they sell billions of drinks every day. These businesses, if fundamentally sound, if what he has spent his life doing was worth doing, if whatever that company gives to the world is worth giving, there is a resilience and a strength to service to the world, to service that is resilient against the vicissitudes, to use Buffett's phrase, of the markets and of the economies. So he might be selling the golden goose right without by looking at the price around the golden goose's neck instead of looking at the eggs that come from the goose.
Okay, let me give
Does
you
that
a
make
little
sense?
more to this. Yeah, oh, completely. So his stock does not get dividends. It's a
That's
tech
fine.
stock. It's a tech stock. It's not a thing, but it's still pretty big up there. And tech stocks scare me personally, as you already know. And I do think they are optionable. So I do think that is a great strategy if he could learn how to do that.
The first thing is, my favorite, some of my favorite strategies are I love the solid ownership of equity of a good company. Now, when you say it's a technology stock, that raises some eyebrows for me
Hmm.
because there's something called obsolescence risk, and there's no question that WordPerfect is obsolete, Quattro Pro is obsolete. I can list a litany of tech companies that were flash in the pans and lasted for a decade and were gone. And so a lot of tech companies will lure employees. This is bait. It's a really rough plan. I mean, I would warn people against this. Is in my new edition of 401 Chaos, I talk about this, is what they want to do is they want employees and they have bait that they dangle. So if all of a sudden say, oh, we'll give you all these shares, we'll give you all these shares, a lot of them just look at the stock price of the shares and say, that's what I'm getting. They're not really saying, well, what am I really getting with this? Am I getting a wonderful business that has staying power? Is this thing they're giving me really valuable or not? And rather than being an investor that picks great businesses, oh, I'm just taking, well, the company will pay you in stock because they can print that money, right? It's easy for them to just, oh, we'll divide up more
Right.
of
Right.
our company and give it to you. It's free money to them. So, that speaks again to people that, here you can put a ladder against the wrong wall and all of a sudden you climb it and you realize, shoot, what they gave me. I mean, think about how crazy this is. Okay, I worked my butt off to get this, but at the end of the day, I really don't want it. Talk about
Right.
climbing a ladder against the wrong wall. What do you mean? You're gonna work 30 years and you're happy with it, and one day you say, well, actually, I don't want any of this. Why was it attractive to you 30 years ago? Because you were focused on the stock price, not the quality of the golden goose you were purchasing.
Hmm.
So the first thing we've got to do is find out, is this company more like an Apple or something that has staying power, Microsoft, or is this, US robotics or, that had no robots, right? Is it
Right.
Micron? We got to find out, is this word perfect? But the second thing you can do is there's cash flow available in the options market. He
Right.
doesn't have to do all or nothing. He can sell part and keep part. There's a lot of things he might be able to do. I don't know that if this is in retirement, he doesn't have to really do much. He might be able to roll some of this over into a self-directed IRA. If it's in a retirement account, it's quite possible that he could roll this over into another investment rather than cash it out.
Hmm.
You'd want to talk to Tom Wheelwright about the tax ramifications. But this is a very common problem because retirement plans are bait. When you go to work for a company, you got to realize the only reason they're giving that to you is they want you to work there. And so it isn't always the best thing that they offer you. And so I would advise him to not look at stock price, but look at what you actually own and see if it's worth owning, because Warren Buffett doesn't pay a dividend on Berkshire. I own some, but I still get cash flow because it's a very easy offerable stock to receive cash from things like options. So I'll tell you where he's probably going to wind up landing is he's probably not going to do an all or nothing. He's probably going to do some here, some there. He has to run a fundamental analysis on his company and see whether it's an easy to identify wonderful business. Does it have what Warren Buffett calls a moat? Because if it's a solid company, he might not want to sell all of it. He might want to sell some of it. And he might not want to sell all of it. We need to talk to Tom and see if there's a rollover option. Because if it's a vested type of thing that he hasn't been able to sell, if it's in a retirement profit share, he might be able to roll it over into a self-directed IRA. Then he might not be able to draw a lot of cash, but he can convert it to other things, and he's going to he's still going to pay. He may or may not, it depends. I don't know how the program's set up. Bottom line is there's a lot to talk about here, but the lesson for everyone is, what is your retirement plan offering you for really? Is it possible that they're dangling a stock program in front of you with just a stock price on it that isn't having a really long-term moat, strong company behind it. And also education-wise, separate that in your mind, because if you've got 30 years of work that you spent 4 years and $100,000 at university to learn how to do that work and experience of 30 years, and all of a sudden you want to do another 30 years with a 10-minute conversation on, oh, where should I do with this money? That imbalance between the first 30 years, the education for earning it, and the second 30 years and the education for keeping it and growing it, that's a huge educational imbalance in my view. So I wish your friend well. Congratulations on, getting close to retirement. Congratulations on at least having enough to generate, a couple $100,000 a year. I would say, what is it, $300,000 or $3 million at 5%, which you can't get a government bond at 5%. That's about $200,000 a year. You lock that in for a long time. $200,000 a year might sound pretty good right now, but $200,000 15 years from now, at the exponential way inflation can grow on you, it might not be what he wanted it to be. So anyway, there you go.
So I'm just going to wrap this up, and because I know we're a little over time, but it's interesting that the same strategy for building wealth is really what you're saying is the same strategy for retirement. It's really about cash flows so that you don't get
Yeah,
stuck with your nest egg dwindling.
he does
Which
not
then,
want he does not want an hourglass, because then you have no legacy to give children. You have no
Mhm.
power beyond the grave. You don't want an hourglass scenario, because if you get stuck in an hourglass and you have, inflation that can attack that and accelerate that sand coming out of there, you don't want that. You want a cash flow strategy, and you want to make sure you're still contributing through the work that you do. Warren Buffett said, I'd rather have 3 solid businesses. That's safer than a big diversification. You'll notice that Buffett never went to debt. He never went to bonds. He always stayed in equities, because bonds become, fixed rate. Tips don't pay enough. The tip securities are inflation adjusted. You can't put enough in I bonds, because that's 10 grand a year. So when you lock into a rate, boy, you've got to figure the costs are what are moving. There's a risk there that I think is
right.
legitimate. If you look at the financial statement of the United States, and you look at where that's headed with off balance sheet liabilities, with the amount of debt, you're competing against a government that is throwing trillions of dollars in debt. It can be a rough road in terms of inflation. Inflation is a huge risk,
Right, right.
because all you need is 3 or 4 more years of the Fed doing what they did and trying to fight 9-10% inflation. I mean, my gosh, that's a big haircut. And plus your taxes, you take 30% taxes and inflation, that big pile of cash, when you're taking chunks at 10%, inflation wise, we have another 10% inflation year. 10% of that money's gone. That's a $300,000 loss to him. One
Yeah.
year of 10% inflation takes a tenth of that money. The state takes 7%. The government takes 20%. What do you got left? So, people don't think this through. They don't study while they're building it, and so their ladder can be up against the wrong wall. We need education. He's got
Right.
a lot of things to make, a lot of decisions to make.
So Andy, let's in some ways carry this over next week. Let's talk about how to compound cash flow in the stock market, because honestly, it sounds like that's one of the best solutions that you're offering right here. So let's discuss not let's take my friend out of next week, but let's really dive into how to compound your cash flow in stocks and really just show people multiple ways to set up for retirement or to handle their retirement. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, compounding is something that is a real mistake. People, they say, "Oh, I know what that is. I don't need to listen to a podcast on compounding because I know what it is." Okay, what is your proficiency in doing it? And have you had the wealth explosion that it brings? Are you set up for that explosion or not? Understanding something and appreciating something are 2 different things. Do you have a good understanding of compounding? Maybe you say yes. Okay, based on your own financial statement and your use of compounding, do you feel you've had a true appreciation for its power as it relates to actionable activities in your own account? And an intellectual assent to a truth means nothing without its application and appreciation for the concept. So I would talk about compounding all day. You can't study it enough. It's an incredible topic, and it's one of the jabs in the fight for financial freedom. In fact, it's more than a jab. It's a right hook. It's a big punch in part of what we do in this fight for freedom financially.
All right, then let's do that next week. And thank you, Andy. Seriously, thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
guys.
super excited to send this episode to my friend.
Zero to cash flow. Yeah, he's probably sitting. The nice thing, if it is a tech stock and it has some volatility in it, we just have to see if it's fundamentally sound. And if it is, there could be cash flow that he could receive from that is so much larger. It would take some education, but if I could show him some of the opportunities he's missing in the leverage he has with that stock, he may say, gee, that's pretty minimal education, minimal effort for me to be able to do this. And if you can save a 30% haircut, why not at least learn about that option? Literally the options.
Yep.
So, okay.
All right, Andy. Then I'll see you next week.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Thanks again, man.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.